how bad are things looking for Russian forces defending Bakhmut? And what is Ukraine's plan now that they've taken two major towns in the south? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's September 19th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, there haven't really been any substantive updates in the control map, right? Really just sort of some repositioning type stuff. You could see Russia, this chunk of territory here sort of realigning as into fixed front lines. Again, Russian forces listed as controlling more of this kind of contested no man's land. I think this is more indicative of the fact that Ukraine is no longer pushing in this region to try to contest these open fields. Likely the 38th, probably pivoting to the defense, deploying a lot of mines, and Ukraine saying, hey, we're probably not going to push across this river here in an effort to take this Tvine by Bazhania. And as you can see, right, this is not this network of villages is not necessarily as tactically advantageous. You see, they are several villages away from Russia's primary defensive line here, and this is a very, very robust defensive line. You can see these sort of mutually supporting trenches from different angles. This is just not where I think Ukraine has realized that this is just not the axis of advance that's going to be most conducive for their efforts. Of course, when we look over to, let's see, Klishchiivka and Bakhmut, there is also not really any difference. I think we're just looking at some very minor updates. When we go over to the combat map, you can see the combat map 2 has just reporting 35 Russian counterattacks across the front lines, right? You've got, of course, their counterattack effort along this Robotyne, Novoprokopivka axis. You can see this actually depicts Ukrainian control as being almost entirely controlling this forested area here. And of course, the other standard Russian counterattacks or Russian attacks happening south of Donetsk city, as well as counterattacks in and around Klishchiivka and Andriivka, which likely I think are a function of more covering or buying Russian troops time to dig in elsewhere on the front lines. I think really it seems like both sides are moving towards a sort of consolidation type of position. And I think this for Ukraine is probably in preparation. They probably have one final push of their counteroffensive before the weather starts to grind operations down a little bit. Again, I think you're going to see potentially you're still, I think, going to see more fighting than people expect. A lot of the fighting here, right, where they talk about the fact that big sweeping mechanized warfare efforts aren't really what's happening in this conflict right now. And so when you instead have trench by trench sort of light infantry clearing operations, you can do that in some pretty adverse conditions. And in some ways, again, if you're Ukraine, who has much better supplies for their troops, much better ability to get them food, and you work really hard and diligently to attrit Russian supply efforts, the winter can actually be a great time. Look for no further than the Battle of Stalingrad, right? Where Russia chose to go on the offensive during the dead of Russian winter. And the reason was because that was when the winter was so much worse for the German army than it was for the Soviet army at the time. And Ukraine may have a similar calculus. They may look and say, look, Russia struggles to get all of its troops supplied with cold weather gear, with adequate food. And they say, we don't have those struggles, right? We are operating on our home turf. So we should actually push in the winter and never let the Russians get a break, right, while their combat power degrades. Now, taking a look at Twitter, X, aka the rumor mill, first, It says, according to this geopolitical hub, there's reports that Ukrainian forces are ramping up for a simultaneous push to cut off Bakhmut from the north and south. Russian sources report that near the Burkiva Reservoir, Ukrainian tanks have been building up, the same as occurring near Klishchiivka and Andriivka. And then he says, buckle up. Right? And you can see this is sort of a very crude map depicting what they think is going to be part of this effort, that the goal may be to cut off this T513 highway. It's about a 3-kilometer distance. Here's what I think is most interesting, right? If you can cut off this, the theory going, if you can cut off these 2 highways, you're going to help isolate Bakhmut, especially all the troops stationed to its west. It's going to be a lot harder to maintain a level of resupply to these troops. Bear in mind, of course, that if you can control this highway, right, you can also you're also occupying the heights around Bakhmut. And you saw, right, once kind of Russia was able to occupy these surrounding heights, then they were able to block by block clear through the city. And it's not clear that this is something that even the Ukrainians are really interested in, clearing block by block through Bakhmut. Instead, I think their goal would be to maneuver around. And as we've talked about in other videos, Russia simply hasn't put the same amount of time into preparing the Bakhmut defenses, right? We haven't heard, honestly, I have not seen any video at all, actually, of fighting near Bakhmut involving minefields. If there are minefields deployed, they seem extremely localized, extremely like hastily deployed. And so, again, I think looking back with the benefit of hindsight, and remember, it's easy to Monday morning quarterback we have all the information, right? We have maximum information about the past, but in the past, we didn't have that information. But if we knew everything 6 months ago that we know today, I think Ukraine would clearly say, we should have pushed our major counteroffensive right into Bakhmut. We should have absolutely smashed the VDV on day one, destroy Russia's best troops. Wagner had pulled out, right? The most effective fighting force dipped, and with no transition plan at all. I guarantee it, Russian forces were left holding the bag. And if those Ukrainian brigades, they would have been able, right? Yeah, the terrain isn't super favorable. It's kind of urban. It's hilly. It's not super easy, but you would see 1/10 of the mines, probably even maybe even 1/100th of the mines that we're seeing in Zaporizhzhia in this region. Again, you would be able to really let those tanks go. And I just think overall it would have been a more successful direction to push. As we've seen, even though this has only been a shaping effort, it has still delivered, in some ways, more territorial gains than the counteroffensive effort in the South. Again, pivoting over to the South, right? Ukrainian army continues its advance. Again, this is an account called Ukraine News. They discuss that Ukrainian forces are continuing to advance towards the heights to the south of Verbova, that apparently this entrenched position is actually an elevated position relative to Verbova. And as we've seen, if you can take the heights around a town, you can put rounds into the town, you can suppress the defenders with fire. And that's how the Battle of Klishchiivka was won, primarily, is that Ukrainian forces occupied the heights and just absolutely crushed the Russian forces, and then were able to support their infantry with accurate, sustained direct and indirect fire, and block by block pushed them out of Klishchiivka. And I think that's the playbook they're looking for here in Verbova. Get to the heights, gain fire superiority and a visual on the entire town, and then deliver a high volume of fire. Guys, if you're interested in seeing my breakdowns of the fighting from this conflict, I can't do it on YouTube. I do it on combatvetnews.com, and a new video drops today. We drop twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So you want to become a member. It's the best way to support the channel. Any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the members only area with videos, all the viral combat videos. I do a deep dive analysis. We try to discern exactly where the video took place, what units are fighting. We learn a bunch about Russia's gear and tactics. We see what's working and what isn't. It's really the best insight that I can give in this conflict, but I can't do it on YouTube because of demonetization policies. I can't even show you the thumbnails from the videos. That's how strict demonetization is. But if you want to see it, become a member. Again, support the channel, keep me independent, and stick it to YouTube's demonetization policies, and get access to the top tier of analysis. Okay, taking a look, moving over to the Institute for the Study of War. This is where things get interesting. Now, they speculate that with liberation of Klishchiivka and Andriivka may have actually ground down Russia's defense south of Bakhmut, and that up to 3 Russian brigades could have been rendered combat ineffective. I think in this case, it would probably be referring to, let's see if we can get some names here of what they're thinking, who've withdrawn from Klishchiivka and Andriivka. It looks like the 83rd Separate Air Guard Assault Brigade, a Akhmat unit, so the Chechens, probably the 4th Motorized Rifle Brigade. I think that's a DNR unit, and the 11th Separate Assault Brigade. So we're looking at, and the 80th Tank Guards. Guys, if true, grinding out an Air Assault Brigade, that's going to be a VDV unit, and the Red Banner 80th Tank Guards would be huge, devastating losses. Big if true. Right. They also speculate that Klishchiivka will give Ukrainian forces control over some ground lines of communication, which is their term for supply routes, and that they at least may get fire control over the T513 highway. We've talked about this. I think it's possible in other videos. If you checked out the video I did on the Leopard, you know that this thing can shoot up to 4 kilometers. So it's theoretically possible that from Ukrainian lines, if you're willing to risk, a Leopard tank may be able to get fire onto this highway. It would be close, right? You're more likely to be able to fly, probably have drones in the air that would spot targets moving along the highway and deliver accurate artillery fire to deny the highway to Russian forces. So I think that's more likely what you're going to see here. And that because it's much closer, the ability to, those drones are going to be able to fly more frequently. You're going to have artillery that's much more active. So I think it's highly possible, but you still are going to have, it's still a long way from full control. And remember, Bakhmut is a city, as we've pointed out. Russia's become very good at building other supply routes through the city, probably those that don't necessarily rely on places like Optina for logistics support. And of course, ISW speculating that a lot of these defending units really did not put up the fight that they have in the past, that the lack of unit rotations have begun to compound, and that Russia may be reaching a breaking point in its units. Again, ISW has been saying this for 6 months, that Russian forces are about to collapse. Though it's easier to believe them when you have Russian forces in pretty quick concession by this war's standards, falling back from key strong points, again, around Bakhmut, right? And intrinsic to this is the fact that, as we pointed out, there's a lot of Russia's best units that are currently trying to contain this breakout. Russia's diverted a lot of combat power to contain this breakout. And the issue is for Russia, when they see this, it means that the remaining defenders of this region, they're going to have to trade space for time. They're going to have to pull back, right? Fight for a position as long as they reasonably can, and then fall back to other positions, right? But you can only fall back for so long. Especially because every time they fall back, you end up in this situation where you have less time to dig in, right? The best, if you had a week to dig in, you could make a mini fortress. If you had a day to dig in, you can get a really nice fighting position and a trench. If you have an hour to dig in, you're going to be fighting out of a 12-inch deep hole in the ground. So the reason I say this is because that may be the situation Russia increasingly finds itself in, having to make these tough calls, withdrawing piecemeal, simply not because of overwhelming Ukrainian support, right? This is like a supporting effort by Ukrainian standards, but because the remaining Russian defenders are so very thin. Anyway, guys, that is really all I had for you for today. Thank you. A huge thank you to the Colonel tier members of CombatVetNews.com. And a huge thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. I really couldn't do this without you guys. And a huge thank you to all of the members of CombatVetNews.com. I appreciate you, and I will see all you guys over on Combat Vet News for the video today. Cheers.